it's just a beautiful life that I created through learning how to change my mindset. And I will say that, like I said, it's a simple process. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I did, an exercise I did, is I went back and I visited the child, me as a child.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was watching my mother hitting me, and I grabbed that child
Mm-hmm.
and I said, "Oh my God, you are so strong. You are so smart. You are gonna have a wonderful life. Like, don't be afraid." And I held her and told her how much I love her.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you do that, you realize, hey, wait a minute, that's me. Why don't I love
Yes.
me? I love that little child. That child was helpless. Why am I
Mm-hmm.
blaming myself? Why am I hurting
Mm-hmm.
myself? Why? So that was huge for me. That was the
Mm-hmm.
first step. And another thing I came to learn was the past really doesn't exist. I mean, it exists, but it really doesn't exist unless you give it thought.
You give it
So,
power,
right,
right?
you give it thought. Yeah, if you don't
Mm-hmm.
give it thought, it's not
Mm-hmm.
there. It doesn't
Right.
exist.
Mm-hmm.
So you can choose to remember the good things. You can choose to dwell on the bad things, but if you
Mm-hmm.
give anything thought, you are letting it exist in your life. So when the abuse stops, you continue to live that abuse because you're keep thinking about it. You keep
Right.
reliving it. You don't
Right.
need to do that anymore. You can move on and learn to love yourself and have a beautiful life. And I think that so many people who've been through trauma and abuse don't know that. They feel,
Yeah.
they feel trapped. They feel like their life is doomed to, depression and anxiety. And that's why I decided to do what I do now, is to show people. And that's why I wrote my book. My whole life story is in there. And it's obviously a lot more has happened than what I can share in this short moment.
Sure.
But I wanted people to realize, I went through all this and I'm happy and I have a beautiful life,
Mm-hmm.
and so can you, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Well, there's a couple of things that come up that I wanted to say, and I think you'll agree, and I think everybody's going to probably get tired of me hearing this, but I'm a firm believer that in order to begin your healing, you have to have self-awareness, right? And
Absolutely.
I mean, how can you realize, like, I can remember you were talking about how people just feel trapped, and I can
Hmm.
just remember feeling like I kept walking up against a wall.
Hmm. Yeah.
How do I get through this wall? Like, this is a huge brick wall.
Mhm.
How do I get through it? And I literally, that's what I envision. And that's what, and that's a scary place. But, this is wonderful what you're sharing.
Thank
It's
you.
amazing. And I'll say, what comes to me too is beauty from ashes.
Yes.
You have made beauty from the ashes of your
Oh,
childhood.
thank you. Thank
you
you.
know and that's what this podcast is really about. It's about people sharing their stories of hope.
Oh,
And it was horrific what happened to you, and I'm sorry. I'm really
well,
sorry. And
thank you.
and I think we need to say that to each other, and just that empathy, right? And the fact that you were talking to your little girl, I was doing the same thing, and there is something huge about that.
There really is.
Huge. And I worked with the little Lisa, and now I'm working with the teenage Lisa, because the abuse that
Okay.
happened to little Lisa was different than the abuse that happened to teenage Lisa. And that one
Right.
was it was probably the worst of it.
Right.
And so I'm kind of working with her. And with little Lisa, there was a couple of things, like she didn't have a voice, right? That got
Hmm.
shut down, and nobody protected her.
Right.
And I imagine when you went in and you were grabbing your little girl and telling her that, and you were protecting her and you were empowering her and strengthening her, and that was a game changer for you.
Right. It really was. It really was. And like I said, that was the first moment that I realized, hey, wait a minute. I do love myself because that little girl is me. And then I'm like, oh, I could dig deeper and I can love all of me. I can love me as a little girl, as a teenager, as an adult, as an older
Mm-hmm.
woman. Like I can love myself. That's huge, and taking ownership. I think, as a child, you can't take ownership because
Yeah.
you're kind of just, vulnerable, and But as an adult, when your life is really hard and really challenging, it's hard sometimes to say, hey, I'm causing this. Because
Right.
you don't want to say, well, of course I wouldn't make myself miserable. Of course I wouldn't make myself
Right.
depressed, but in reality, we are the creators, and we create our life. If it's miserable, it's because we are not doing what we need to get out of it. We're placing blame elsewhere. We're not taking ownership. Ownership, self-love, awareness, knowing what the emotional scale is, knowing where you're vibrating on the frequency, all of that is so empowering and so worth
Yes.
learning it, to take the time and do it, because it's just a life changer. I would have never imagined when I was a teenager that I would have a life that I absolutely adore.